don't know me, my name is Glenis Pagan. I'm the Executive Director of Filantropia Puerto Rico, or Philanthropy Puerto Rico. And you know that our purpose really is to strengthen and develop that philanthropic infrastructure in the island. So one of the big things that we do is inform and talk about issues that happen in Puerto Rico so that we can collectively come up with solutions, because systemic problems require systemic solutions, and that means coming together, everybody. And this is one of the biggest purposes of the action dialogues. In this case, we're having a webinar series beginning this year, really in response of the earthquakes that we've been having for the beginning of this year. Just today, we had a 5.3 that was felt in the metro area. So this is a long-term issue that we're facing. And as every crisis, every crisis really gives us it clears up all the systemic issues. So what we'll be doing in these webinar series is talking about these systemic problems and probably coming together to find some recommendations and solutions. So we'll have different topics. Today, we're really setting up the tone to understand where the crisis is happening. Where the crisis is happening and what was the situation prior to this crisis and after Maria and now after that, to see the effects in the different areas and to really just see the whole picture. And as we go into other topics of mental health, economic development, education, we have this prior data. So I really hope this is going to be wonderful. At the end, we will have a time for question and answers, and of course the conversation will continue. It won't stop here. This webinar series is going to be for the next couple of weeks, and we're going to have them on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. Puerto Rico time. And of course, we're recording, so this conversation will be shared, hopefully to really keep the conversations and the collective actions running, which is the biggest intent. Thank you so much for being here. I want to introduce today's speaker, which is a very close friend and associate to Filantropia Puerto Rico. We're really happy to have him. José Caraballo Cueto, he's a Ph.D. in economics. I will share it in our landing page of these webinars. We have his full bio that you can see all the accolades and how great he is. He is also part of the Public Education Observatory or think tank, which this year and next year is going to come up with many very interesting studies that will definitely help us all in philanthropy to have better strategies and how to approach. But I don't want to get too much into what the Public Education Observatory is doing, because I really want to go ahead and give it over to Jose. So Jose, thank you so much. I'll leave it to you on the presentation.
Thank you, Glenis, and thank you to all of you for being here. My presentation will be, I'm going to start saying about how is the economy, or how was the economy before Maria, then after Maria, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of the earthquakes, of the ongoing earthquake that we are having now in Puerto Rico. So before the hurricanes, Puerto Rico was undergoing what I call our Great Depression. Depression in economics is a huge decline in economic output. In economics, it's not looking especially at wages or poverty. It's looking more about how much was the decline and for how long. In this case, in this period, after 2006, Puerto Rico had a huge decrease in output. Just to give you an idea, the size of the economy in 2018 equals the size of the economy of 1999. Of course, after adjusting by inflation. So you can see there how many years we have lost of production in the island. We have a huge debt crisis. That the public debt represent almost the size of the economy. GNI is the gross national income. more or less is the size of the economy. More than 280,000 jobs have been lost since 2006. And for the first time in our history, the population is declining, or at least that we know when we compare population data sets in our history. This is the first time that we know that population is declining. And that's because we have a huge migration to the US. Lack of employment push people to migrate, and also the difficult socioeconomic situations in the island have led people to have fewer and fewer children in Puerto Rico. So just talking about children, let's look at the child poverty rates before Maria. Here you can observe that per county, there is a huge difference between the metropolitan area, which is this area here, and the center part of the island and in the south. In particular, if you live close to San Juan, the poverty rate of children and the general poverty rate is much lower. But if you move to the mountain, especially this area here from Calle to Añasco, more or less Guánica, and a few other towns here in the south, child poverty rate can be as high as 70%. In particular, child poverty rates in Guánica was 84% before Maria. It means that 8 out of 10 children were poor in Guánica before Maria and before the earthquake, of course. One can ask why. Why do we observe this geography of output in Puerto Rico? Well, many of the factories that were located in the island before the deindustrialization that we had since 2006, I'm talking about Section 936, many of these factories operate in the countryside, in Maricao, in Sidra, Arroyo, and many other towns in the countryside. But when they left, there was no economic policy to substitute that output that those counties used to have. So what we have right now is that just these 4 counties in the metropolitan area produce about 55% of the total production of Puerto Rico. And when I say production, it's not just manufacturing, it's goods and services as well. So all these other counties that are here with the yellow color, they produce less than 1% of the total output of Puerto Rico. So if you live in one of those towns, the probability of you being poor is high because the economic activity is low, unemployment is high, and if you don't have a car to move to one of these center of productions, it's hard for you to have social mobility. So here I have some data about the 5 towns that suffered during the earthquake, especially Guánica. I'm going to start with Guánica. So the population, you have it in this column here, was about 17,000 that used to live in Guánica before Maria. Almost 1 out of 3 people or 3 individuals in Guánica didn't finish high school or didn't have the equivalent of a high school degree. And this is the population older than 25. So it means that almost 1/3 of this population did not finish this high school and they did not enter into university. Here there is, I'm talking about also here about the median age, but also I want to focus in this, in the unemployment rate, which was 31% before Maria. 31% of the unemployment rate that is a huge unemployment rate. If you look at these statistics in the US, it's less than 5%. If you look at the whole Puerto Rico, 32% is almost the double of the unemployment rate that you have in Puerto Rico. And the poverty rate, the general poverty rate, 65% in Guánica, and that was before Maria. It was more or less 20 percentage points higher than the poverty rate that we observed for the whole Puerto Rico. And as I said, the children poverty rate was 83%, also far higher than the already high poverty rate that we observe in Puerto Rico. Guayanilla, which is another town in the southwest, population is more or less similar to Guánica, but the educational attainment was a little bit better than in Guánica. The unemployment rate is 24%, which is higher than the average of Puerto Rico, and the poverty rate also was higher than in Puerto Rico, 56%. So in other words, most of the people that live in Guayanilla as well are poor. And the children poverty rate is 69%. And again, this was before Hurricane Maria. Peñuelas, this is a very interesting case because in Peñuela, there is a lot of energy factories such as Costa Sur and AEX and others that are polluting these communities to benefit other towns. But even though they're suffering all this pollution and they have this huge energy sector in this town, the poverty rate was 57% and the child poverty rate was 69%. In terms of educational attainment, it's more or less similar to Guayanilla. 27% of the population did not finish high school, and the unemployment rate was 23%, also higher than for the whole Puerto Rico. Ponce is a very interesting case because Ponce had the highest economic activity among these counties in the southwest. But even though they have a relatively large population, 149,000 of people live in Ponce, and the educational attainment was better than in the rest of these towns, and the unemployment rate also was lower than for the case of Puerto Rico. Poverty in Ponce is higher than in Puerto Rico. 52% of the population in Ponce was poor before Maria. And in the case of child poverty rate, 69%. So Ponce has in general a higher economic development than Peñuelas, but child poverty rate is at the same level. So this is just pointing to a high inequality in Ponce. They have better economic outcomes, but if it's not well distributed, then you're going to have problems with poverty. The case of Yauco, population is higher than in Peñuelas and than in Guánica, but the population that did not finish high school also is high, it's 28%, roughly 1 out of 4 individuals older than 25 years old did not finish high school. The unemployment rate is relatively high, 24%, higher than the rest of the Puerto Rico, or the average of Puerto Rico. Poverty rate, 50%, and the child poverty rate, 58%, that is at the level of Puerto Rico. So the common denominator of these 5 towns in the Southwest is that poverty is higher than 50%, child poverty rate is higher than 58%, and the unemployment rate is relatively high, except for Ponce. On top of that, you have the impact of Maria. So the economy basically collapsed in September, October, November, and December of 2017. The unemployment insurance claims were the highest ever recorded, at least in 30 years that we have been recording on insurance claims in Puerto Rico. Migration was the highest since 2006, especially many refugees migrate to the States. Some of them return in 2018, others return in 2019, but others will never return. Suicides increased by 20% from 2016 to 2017, and this is interesting because in the case of the US, during the Great Recession, the suicide rate increased because people couldn't cope with the financial crisis and the loss of wealth and so on and so forth. But in the case of Puerto Rico, even though we were having a Great Depression, suicide rates were declining since at least the last 6 years. But then it started increasing again after Maria. FEMA, as of January 3rd of 2018, there were almost 1 million applications to FEMA. FEMA rejected almost half of those applications and didn't grant the maximum grants to many individuals. Actually, at that time was less than 1% of the households that get the maximum grants. And the maximum grants I just want to clarify that at that time, the maximum grant was 33,000. So it wasn't a lot. With 33,000 in Puerto Rico, given the construction costs in Puerto Rico, you cannot construct a house out of concrete, just wood and zinc, and that's it. Culebra, which is an island in the east, didn't get, nobody get the maximum grant, and also in Hormigueros, Quebradillas, and Sabana Grande. In the case of Lajas, San Germán, just one household get the maximum grant. But the economy rebounded in 2018, and this was due to 13 billion of federal funds that were distributed during the last year, and about $6 billion also that were invested from insurance payments. So you have, in these two sources of funds, you have almost $20 billion, which is almost a quarter of the whole economy. So we can expect that the economy increase during 2018, especially during fiscal year 2019. And there is a lot of celebration, especially in the private sector because of reconstruction, and there is a lot of celebration in the case of the Fiscal Control Board. But I would like to point out that the benefit of this reconstruction and the benefit of this temporary economic growth is not being distributed to everybody. There are some individuals and sectors that get the most out of this reconstruction, especially U.S. contractor firms and retailers and some sectors that are linked to the construction sector. But if you are a farmer, if you used to work in one of these insurance companies, or you are in communication, those sectors are worse off after Maria. And of course, if you are one of these families that FEMA didn't assist, you are worse off after Maria because the local government didn't have at that moment, and right now doesn't have a social policy to help these displaced families. On top of that, you have the ongoing earthquakes, and I say the ongoing because just today we had another earthquake. It was almost at 11 a.m. Or at least we feel it here in the case of Cayey, where I'm located right now. The epicenter of these earthquakes have been most of the time Guánica, and Guánica, before Maria, would have qualified as the poorest county in any U.S. territory. So if you look at the 50 states, you look at other U.S. territories, and you compare towns over there and counties over there, Guánica will have qualified one as the poorest county. Thanks to austerity, thanks to the debt crisis, thanks to the slow reconstruction, the economy of Puerto Rico is highly vulnerable to external shocks, especially to the first big earthquake. We have a huge blackout. The whole island didn't have energy for a couple of days, in some places even for more than a week. Sectors that won during this crises, retailers again, because people have to buy more things to prepare and to cope with the crisis. But if you're a retailer in the South, you have been hit very bad by this earthquake. Right now, well, not right now. Last week, I went there, and it looks like a war zone, especially Guánica. You don't see, most of the businesses are closed. Hotels barely have any tourists. People don't want to go there. Local tourists or foreign tourists, it's hard to observe tourists there. People don't want to invest. And landlords, they don't want to repair houses because they think it's not profitable. You see a lot of migration, internal migration, people moving to other towns, and also migration to the US. If you are from an exporting sector, you also observe huge economic losses because consumers abroad will not wait for products from Puerto Rico. And tourism was right now in high season. So hotels and their employees in Guánica and in this part of Puerto Rico should be right now in high season, but as I said, there is barely any tourists in that area. So I want to end up with some alternative. What can we do to help? In my opinion, there are short-term and long-term alternatives. In the case of the short-term, the census 2020, or the population census, should take place during the next month. But you can imagine what is the challenges that they're going to face if they do the census during the next month. Because people there are not in their houses, many people migrate, others are in shelters. But even if the Census Bureau go to shelters to quantify how many people live in Guánica, it's hard because people are not there during the day. People move, people visit relatives, people go to supermarkets. Sometimes they visit their previous homes. So it's hard to conduct a census or to implement a census during March in Puerto Rico. But it is in the U.S. Constitution, so it's hard for the Census Bureau to postpone the census because according to the Constitution of the U.S., this is the time, during this year, should be done the population census. So one of the things that I think we should do is to repeat the census in the Southwest during March 2021. And in that sense, we can compare the population that we observed in 2021 and compare it to the population that is right now, and also have a better idea, a better picture of the real population that is in Guánica. I have to point out that many federal agencies use this number from the population census to allocate funding and to develop projects. So if they conduct the population census now and they don't find a lot of people there, funding for these municipalities is going to decrease, and that is just going to exacerbate the socio-economic conditions that I just described earlier. Something else that I think we should think about it is to provide aid to displaced families that were not covered by FEMA. These are, if you go to these towns and to many other towns, you're gonna still observe their blue tarps. Many of these families have been more than 2 years with blue tarps. And on top of that, they have this earthquake. And if they were not covered during Hurricane Maria, it's probably that FEMA is not going to cover them during this earthquake. So I think that those families need or deserve actually aid, and the local government should take care of that, and also maybe NGOs can help these displaced families. The case of tenants, they are in a very particular situation because FEMA say, well, I cannot give any aid to repair your house because you are not the owner. So you have to call your landlord and tell him or her to repair your house. But as I said earlier, landlords and no one actually want to invest in Guánica right now because they know that it's not profitable. Maybe they think that maybe they're expecting an even worse earthquake in the future. So what many of these landlords are telling these tenants is, well, if you don't want to live there, just move because I'm not going to invest in those houses as of now. And FEMA also said the same thing. So it's hard to, the situation of tenants, I think is very particular, and it's important also that we pay attention to it. In the long term, in other words, when the reconstruction ends, we need to think about the economic model of these towns. They need, as you probably realize, they need jobs. The unemployment rate is very high, and the economic activity is very low. So one of the things that I was thinking is that we need to create a new advertising strategy in the case of tourism to attract more tourists to the region. It's hard to observe foreign tourists in this area. Most of the tourists that go there are local tourists. And that's not a way where that's not the way that you create a vibrant tourist activity in any town. Also, we need land reform. If you observe, if you go to this part of Puerto Rico, you're gonna observe that it's a beautiful valley, but you don't see a lot of businesses in that area. Also, you don't see much agriculture because many of these lands belongs to families that they don't want to do anything with it. Some of them just inherit these lands from their parents or maybe their grandparents. They don't want to sell it, they don't want to do anything with it, but these lands, people need these lands to create agribusinesses, to create, or businesses in general. And some of them actually need it also to construct their houses. So I think we need a land reform, and we should be developing that land reform in the Southwest, not to say in the whole Puerto Rico. Amnesty for informal businesses. There are many informal businesses there, but the government, they have a punitive approach. So most of them, they just want to pay to impose penalties for people that are not filing taxes. I think we need to change that approach because many people, they go to the informal market as a way to survive. So if we create, instead of having a punitive approach, we help them to develop their business. That's what I call capacity building. We waive those penalties and we help them move to formality. I think that's a better way to help these economies in the long term. And also, I think to restart the economy, to restart the economy in these towns, the government can provide subsidies to payroll. I remember that the IRS provide subsidies during Hurricane Maria for those businesses that were open during the crisis. So that's a way to incentivize these businesses to restart again and to employ their employees, because one of the things that I always says is that in Guánica, the people that didn't lose their house lost their jobs. So you know, it's a difficult situation for most of the people that live here when the unemployment rate is so high. So if you have any question, I'm happy to answer those questions, and thank you for your time and patience.
Thank you, Jose, for that awesome presentation. So I will go ahead. You can ask a question via chat. So in the lower part of your screen, you should have a little chat button, so you can send a question through there. Or you could unmute yourself. You have the power to do that now, and you might go ahead and ask a question. So does anyone have a question for Jose? Yeah, I like the proposals. Thank you, Jose. As we saw these, I think Jose did a great job in giving us a little a history of the region and how these crises have just expanded the crisis, how this really affects the energy sector, because I think it was 30% of the energy that was generated in Guánica. So that impacts in Peñuelas, and that impacts the other regions, and the reform that's happening currently with the electric system. Education, we don't have the latest numbers, and we will have webinars that we talk more specifically about education, but there's many kids that are not going to school at this moment. As you can see, mental health is also a big problem because, like Jose was saying, many of these people are very, very scared just to be in the region. They might have a home that is not totally affected, but they're not sleeping inside their home. Just like Jose said, this morning we felt in the metro area a 5.3 earthquake. So even us in this area, we're a little, we can see the effects of these, this problem. Any questions that you have? Let me see if I have anything. I don't see anything. So again, this webinar specifically was to really set the tone and the initial context, and it's like the host for all the other webinars that we will have. But we do have a question. So Maria from Oxfam, livelihoods for the region is something that concerns the NGO sector working in the region. How can we get Jose to work with FEMA in rolling out their work in the region? Well, Jose.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you because I have interference here.
No,
can you repeat it again?
Sure, I'll repeat the question, but basically it's how can we get you to work closer with FEMA in rolling out the work in the region. And I will say that from us, Philanthropy Puerto Rico, this is definitely one of our intentions to start getting this information and influencing much more how the implementation of solutions are. But Jose, have you had any comments? So the question is, livelihoods for the region is something that concerns the NGO sector working in the region. How can we get Jose to work with FEMA in rolling out their work in the region? This information cannot continue to stay in our circles, for sure.
Yes, I remember when I get this data, especially this information that is here. Most of the time, when in the center, in the data center that I lead, which is the Census Information Center, we are a liaison between the Census Bureau and communities in Puerto Rico. I distribute this information to the media in Puerto Rico, so I remember it was part of the of many reports in the newspapers. So I remember one day that FEMA called to the university and said, "Why are you putting those numbers out? You know, we are still working with this, and it's going to get better." So they were like a little bit upset with me that I was putting these numbers out, even though it was real. I wasn't lying. These are their numbers, actually. So I don't know if they have other plans right now, but if they do have it, I'm more than happy to collaborate with them. Meanwhile, I think we have to keep pushing the public and policymakers to know about these numbers, because I know they don't look good for FEMA officials, but it is what it is, and I will be more than happy to collaborate with any of them. In the case right now of tenants, for instance, in Guánica, many of the FEMA officials that went there, they just said to tenants, they said, "You know what? There's nothing I can do for you," and that's not actually true. They do have, they could be supporting temporary relocations for these tenants so they can move to other towns. But they, at least to the community leaders that I talked during last week, they didn't give any option. They just say, you know what, you have to deal with your landlord, and they say, well, I already tried that. It's not going to work out. So I hope that the FEMA change this approach and truly help these tenants to relocate from Guánica to other towns in the area, or to places where people want to live. Because other thing is that you don't find many landlords willing to rent apartments in Guánica as of now, because they are uninsured and they are afraid of renting. So that relocation has to take place in other towns. But of course, they have to do that by communicating with the affected families and not just by taking decisions from the top, because it's a very particular situation.
Cool. Let me interrupt. Thank you, Jose. And I have a kind of a follow-up question to Maria's question. So Maria, does their work mean FEMA programs you're referring to? And I'm checking the chat just in case. I think with David, I think it was probably a bit of both. So I do have another question from Comic Relief, and yes, we are currently responding. Our approach, obviously, it's always very much third level, long-term recovery. Most of the first initial response is done by our members and other organizations that focus more on that. But one of the things that we have been able to support with the collective fund that we do manage is we will be supporting initiatives alongside some other philanthropy entities within the island to really give them more impact. But those continue to be very much focused with our long-term issues of transparency, data generation, and capacity building for organizations. We are looking at anything that has to do with housing, education, mental health that we just added, and security we also added, and what was the other one? And capacity building for the organization supporting that. So that was from Madison. Any other questions? You're welcome. Let me change to Spanish. ¿Alguna pregunta? ¿Algún comentario de alguien más? Well, I think, anyway, you can definitely send your questions. You can either send, I'm going to put my email here. You can send an email directly to myself or to philanthropiapr.org. You can send your questions there. You will receive, if you registered this recording of this webinar along with the presentation and any other information that we commit to giving. Again, thank you so much for being here. Remember, you will be getting notifications for our next calls. We have next Tuesday, we will be talking about human rights within the recovery. It will be a great conversation to have. So hope you join us. Let's see, we got one question. These statistics are sobering. Thank you to José Caraballo and Philanthropia Puerto Rico for enabling the dialogue. Well, thank you for that comment, Brenna. And we definitely, this is just